Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast. 10 minutes past 8 o'clock. It is Thursday morning, the 6th day of the second month of 2025. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Michlin. Thanks for tuning in to KSJE. We're at 90.9 FM over the air here in San Juan County, New Mexico. Good morning, Durango, Colorado, where you're listening to us at 103.3 FM. And good morning everywhere else. If you're anywhere else on the planet, you've tuned in from our website, probably, ksje.com, or you may have asked one of those smart speakers to play KSJE. And if it's smart enough, it'll do it. Good morning also to our viewers who are joining us today. The video of this program is streaming out live to the KSJE Facebook page and also to our YouTube channel. So welcome, everyone. Glad to have you with us, because coming up, it is the return of my one of my favorite guests. Paul Reed is here from Archaeology Southwest. It is his first visit of the new year, so we're looking forward to our conversation with Paul starting in the next few moments here on KSJE this morning. Then, of course, stay tuned, because next hour, Mick Hess is going to take us roving with the arts. It is our long-running classical music program beginning at 9:06 here on KSJE. We also invite you to connect with us on other social media platforms like X and Instagram, in addition to Facebook and YouTube. And if you're a podcast person, a reminder that you can subscribe for free to KSJE Podcasts and maybe discover a new local program that you may have missed that's available wherever you're probably already listening to podcasts. So check it out. And like I said, discover a new program possibly. Outside our studios here at San Juan College, it is a sunny Thursday morning, currently 30 degrees. We're expecting a mostly sunny and breezy day today, the high temperature reaching about 62 this afternoon. Clear skies overnight with a low of 31. Tomorrow mostly sunny, a bit warmer with a high of 63 on Friday. Partly sunny with a high of 58 on Saturday. Partly sunny, 59 on Sunday. 56 on Monday. But take a look towards the end of next week. We're keeping an eye on the storm system that might be moving in Thursday night on into Friday and Saturday. That might bring us a chance of some rain or snow. We'll keep an eye on that and see how it goes. I'll be back with my guest, Paul Reed from Archaeology Southwest, right after this on KSJE. KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center. The caregivers of San Juan Regional Medical Center are committed to bettering the quality of life, health, and care of individuals, families, and our communities. Life is their sacred trust. Better is their mission. Here is their home. San Juan Regional Medical Center, improving the health of the Four Corners since 1910. And back in Studio A this morning, and with my guest, as I mentioned, Paul Reed is joining us once again from his home in the Taos area. Paul, good morning and Happy New Year.
Good morning, Scott. Happy New Year to you. Glad to be back on.
Thank you. Good to have you with us, of course, and lots to talk about today. And I know one of the things you've been watching certainly is your work on public lands across the Southwest, and with some of the endangered areas of the Southwest that we've talked about on this program a lot, and certainly how that is going to be impacted, if it will be, by the new administration. And that's kind of what you've been watching over the last few weeks, I would think, huh?
Right. I mean, we're definitely seeing some changes nationwide,
right,
with the new administration coming in, and just beginning to think about the implications for the places here in the Southwest and the West that a lot of people care about.
Sure. And certainly it's not a new conversation, right? I mean, the public lands and some of the things that have been, trying to manage those public lands between preservation and development for maybe energy or recreational purposes or things along that line. It's a long-running topic, is it not?
It is, Scott. And as you know, we've talked a lot about how in America we have to balance diverse interests, meet our energy needs, but also conserve the important places, the landscapes, the sacred sites, the cultural sites, all the things that have great meaning for America's heritage. So yeah, we're in the midst, I would say, of another adjustment in figuring out how to best do all these different management practices.
Right. Certainly a major shift, I guess, right, in some of the priorities that we're seeing coming out of the new presidential administration in Washington. And so, what's been some of the things, I guess, that's caught your eye? There's a new Secretary of the Interior, and certainly some new policies that are coming out from his office.
Right. So Secretary Burgum, the former governor of North Dakota, is wanting, with direction from, the Oval Office to sort of unleash energy, as the way as they've termed it, and
Right.
so we have some concerns about that because sort of at the outset of any discussion, America has been for more than 10 years now a net exporter of both oil and natural gas. And our state is in the top 3 or 4 for states that produce those minerals in great quantities. So, part of the concern that we have is this notion that telling the public essentially that America's energy production is way down and we're in a crisis. We are not in a crisis at all. We are producing tons of oil and gas still. We've had clean energy in the form of wind and solar, geothermal, et cetera, coming on so strongly here in the last 4 or 5 years. So part of this is just trying to understand and have people understand that the world hasn't changed dramatically over 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 years, and that if this administration wants to push domestic energy development, that has to be done in a very responsible way.
Got it. And I guess, too, the idea would be maybe for some people saying, well, if we're doing so well and producing all this energy, why is it costing still so much for me to fill up my tank at the gas pump? I guess forgetting that gasoline and petroleum is traded on a global, worldwide market level.
Well, right, exactly. And if you look at inflation-adjusted prices, we're paying really a minimal amount to fill our tanks compared to 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So those things are important to keep in mind. We certainly had some spikes in inflation of food prices during COVID, with the worldwide crisis. But, if you look back at the economy over the last 4 or 5 years in America, it's been very strong. So if the strength of the economy is not reaching all sectors, then that really is a different issue that, we probably need to think about in other ways. But yeah, our energy production is strong, and I'm concerned myself about sort of the gutting of clean energy, solar and wind, and again, ramping up oil and gas activity in close proximity to places that 90% of the American public says we should protect. So those are our concerns.
Right. And so with that being said, and we're looking at some of the information that was released by the new Interior Secretary Burgum's office about addressing what he called a national energy emergency, unleashing American energy, as you've addressed, of course, and other things like that as well. And so there are certain areas of the country that you feel are at greater risk, I guess, than others when it comes to this change maybe in the federal government?
Right, exactly. And, one of the concerns that we have is if you look at public lands in the West, and thinking specifically of Bureau of Land Management or BLM lands, at this point, something like 85% of those lands in the West, 245 million acres, are already open potentially for oil and gas leasing. So we've got about 15%, which really isn't some huge amount, that has been protected in one way or another through conservation practices or wilderness, and a few other things that are kind of in the toolkit. So to kind of dip into that 15% to address an energy crisis that really isn't present, if you look at the facts, is very problematic. And in particular in our area, we, as we've talked on the show many times, Scott, Archaeology Southwest, the All Pueblo Council of Governor, Pueblos of Acoma Zuni, many others, Wilderness Society, National Parks Conservation, we've all worked for more than a decade to protect this zone around Chaco and to keep the several 100,000 sites in that zone and that area, that buffer zone around Chaco, protected from oil and gas. And And despite having that protection zone in place, New Mexico's energy production, oil and gas, has been consistent and has even risen. So, the point we've made all along is that going into these areas, this other 15% nationally and in our own backyard, is not really going to boost energy production that much. So that's why we consider it a bad trade-off to open areas that have been identified by multiple tribal groups, and the interested public at a very high level as areas that should be conserved, to open those to oil and gas, which is going to produce marginal returns in a lot of those areas anyway. Just seems like a really bad trade-off to us.
Right. And of course, it certainly is a very complicated topic. And again, even some members of the Navajo tribe, though, would be maybe negatively impacted, right? We talked a bit before we came on the air about the Latis, right? Maybe the folks that have some oil and gas rights in that checkerboard area in and around Chaco Canyon and things. And if there was that, if they're not able to develop that, that's a concern to them as well, correct?
Right. I mean, and it's a concern that we should talk about. What we've said pretty much all along is that Alati rights to develop their own private mineral resources is not impacted by any of the federal actions. And in fact, if we look back since about 2010, 2011, quite a number of oil and gas facilities have gone on into production on Alati lands, sort of in this zone around Chaco. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer to think about these opportunities being taken away, and sort of the classic language that is used sometimes of the federal government taking rights. I really don't think that's what's happening here. If some of these other areas on allotment lands in Chaco were likely to be high producers of oil and gas, I believe we would have already seen those developed. The Mancos Shale in our area, in the Farmington area, really came into production pretty heavily in 08, 9, and 10. And at that point, a number of new wells were proposed and went in. Again, some of those on allotment lands, some on state lands before before Stephanie Garcia Richard, our state land commissioner, removed those from production. So we had that kind of mini boom, sort of the last mini boom in the Four Corners area. And by about 12 or 13, most of that had subsided and things had kind of leveled back. So, it's our feeling as we look at this, and as we talk to geologists about potential, that most of the best areas to tap into the Mancos Shale have been tapped. And until we really reach a point where we are literally running out of an oil and gas resource, either in New Mexico or nationwide, these areas are never going to be near the top of what oil producers are going to want to target. So therefore, if the lands are available, it just seems like an opportunity for companies to grab these and sort of hold them for an uncertain future, while those lands then are not available for other uses. So again, Scott, this complicated balance of how we use our public lands is something that deserves a lot of attention and consideration.
Sure, very true. And for folks, Paul Reed, who've been kind of paying attention and maybe listening to you and I discuss these issues over the last few years, I mean, there was some, as you mentioned, some further protections around Chaco Canyon. Certainly the Chaco Canyon proper is going to be protected, as is a lot of these national monuments and parks and things like that. But it's that area around them that we're kind of talking about. And so, there's some protections there, but they're not necessarily permanent protections. Is that what concerns you and your colleagues?
Well, that's right. The culmination of the more than decades-long effort was the move by then Interior Secretary Deb Haaland in 2021 to withdraw those lands, about 360,000 acres roughly, in a series of zones around Chaco going out 10 miles. And again, this is the federal lands. This is something around 20% of those lands, not to impact any tribally held lands, either Navajo Nation Tribal Trust or allotment lands, but to create an area where we could have some bit of a buffer zone around our national park, and anyone who's been to Chaco, gone up on top, has enjoyed looking at the amazing sites up there, the site at Pueblo Alto, and sort of looked out across that landscape, trying to sort of take themselves back in time, to be back 1,000 years ago, when Chaco was peaking, Pueblo people were all over the landscape, trading, building roads, building these big sites. To be able to understand that landscape is critically important. And if we put oil and gas facilities right up to the edge of Chaco, then what will happen is people will go up, they'll be trying to understand that landscape, and instead they'll hear and see and probably smell oil and gas facilities, intruding into that ancient landscape. This is just not something that we should consider doing in any way, shape, or form. Again, if we circle back to the idea that these aren't even, prime production lands for any oil and gas resource, I'm hoping to, that this is just, with all the time we've put into this, that this is still pretty abundantly clear to a lot of our listeners that this is a bad trade-off. And we have many special places in America. We should keep them special and protected, and really choose to make responsible decisions about how we exploit, any of our oil and gas or other mineral resources.
And the other thing too, Paul Reed, I wanted to ask you about was that during the last Trump administration, we saw some boundary changes at the nearby Bears Ears area in southeastern Utah and some other places like that. Is that something, and again, this hasn't happened yet, but is that something that you're expecting maybe happening again under the second Trump administration?
Yeah, with the executive orders that have come out of the Oval Office, all the agencies were instructed to look for ways to, quote, streamline and deregulate, America pretty much at every level. And again, if we focus just on what, we work with typically as an organization and what we're concerned about in terms of the landscape of the Four Corners, it seems very likely that Bears Ears National Monument, Grand Staircase Escalante, potentially other monuments will be reduced in size. And this connects to this idea of, we need to unleash energy and get our energy production back up again. And if we look at the same oil and gas sort of based arguments that we just discussed for Chaco, there is some potential here and there in different portions of southeast Utah. They're obviously producing wells. They're on federal lands, some state of Utah lands, some tribal lands up there. But the areas that don't have oil and gas are not prime areas to develop. And, with world markets the way they're at, and again, America producing so much oil and gas without going into these sensitive areas, we're very concerned about Bears Ears being shrunk down so that, some very marginal lands could potentially be bought by oil companies and held for decades. We're concerned about uranium mining in there, we're concerned about potash. There are places to access these resources that don't get close to areas of great importance to America. So we're seeing that same, concern about how to balance this, and to not just go from, hey, we're interested in protecting fragile landscapes, cultural sites involving our tribal partners at the highest level, to, this energy thing is so important. It's a national crisis. It's national security. I feel like we're having a big disconnect between what actually is happening on the ground and in our economy and what we're hearing about, this direction.
Got it. And so for organizations like yours and others, Paul Reed, Archaeology Southwest has been involved in these issues for a while. As you mentioned earlier, you've gotten partnerships with, tribal governments and other entities and other environmental entities and things along that line. Is that still a strong kind of coalition, I guess, to go up against some of these proposed or even maybe changes that haven't come around yet, to maybe fight back or at least push back in the courts?
Definitely. All the groups that I'm working with in a number of areas of concern around Chaco, up in the Bears Ears area, and another one that we haven't talked about a lot, Scott, but just down south of us near Santa Fe, there's an area known as the Caja del Rio, and Los Alamos, and the National Nuclear Security Administration is pushing through a power line to cut through an area in the Caja that's very important to local Hispanic groups, many of the Pueblos, farmers, hunters, people grazing in that area. So, yeah, we're seeing, just issues coming up on all these different conservation fronts. And yeah, folks are, we're talking about this. We want to figure out how to successfully hear what's being proposed, and then challenge the things that we don't think fit within America's long and strong history of conserving and preserving these landscapes, which we ultimately can't replace once they're gone.
Sure, right. And as we said at the beginning of the show, though, that is kind of the difficult balancing act, right, of how to do that, how to balance everyone's wants and needs for these public lands, right, to be able to use them for energy development or recreation or what have you, or also but also to protect these very important areas on these public lands as well. And that's something that you've been talking about with me, I know, for years and years and years. And so for folks that are listening and watching us this morning, what should they be watching for, I guess, as we move forward? Certainly the statements from the new Secretary of the Interior kind of gives us an idea of where their priorities are, correct?
Right. I mean, my encouragement for folks listening who have concerns is just to really inform yourself and hear what's being proposed. And then, if there's a particular rhetorical line coming out of one office or another telling, the public, trying to tell the public something, take that in, think about it yourself, and then go seek other information so that you can have more of a complete picture of it. One of the things that I think is a big irony, Scott, and certainly as a media professor at San Juan College and with your extensive experience, you understand this. We seem to have more and more access to information in our media. Traditional media, of course, still exists, but we have all these different sources. But some of the fact-checking aspects of those have changed dramatically. Mark Zuckerberg announcing, in the last few weeks that Facebook is no longer going to fact-check, and you can now say almost anything you want. Elon Musk takeover of Twitter, and with all this information going out, we have more information available. But I think the irony is that a lot of that information is at a lower quality and is much more likely to be used, unfortunately, in these times to push strongly one agenda or another without sort of the balance that I think America has typically enjoyed. And for my part, I see that as a huge threat to a democratic society. So without spending more time on that, I would encourage people to seek out the multiple sources of news in these different areas. And, our organization puts out information, as our environmental partners do, and we intend to keep a really close eye on this. The other side of this that we're hearing, hints of, and this certainly happened during the prior Trump administration, is a shortening of periods of review for federal actions and sort of a reduction of the opportunity for all segments of the public to participate as decisions are made for land management or energy management. And that's of a particular concern. I understand, and I felt this myself, the public can get frustrated with what seem to be very lengthy public processes and review periods. But that is, again, for me, an essential part of what it means to participate in this American democracy. So that's something that we're paying a lot of attention to and are wanting to, ask people to go out and participate when we do have those opportunities.
Sure, very true. When you're talking about news and news sources, and that's a whole other show, Paul Reed. We could spend another half an hour talking about both of our thoughts on that for sure, but it's a point well taken. And I think, as we always say, for folks who are wanting to know what's going on, to know your sources, right, and to make sure that you are getting your information from reliable sources, and maybe if one of your sources tilts a certain way on the political spectrum, maybe you find a source that tilts the other way on the political spectrum to try to see what the other point of view is, since there's always different perspectives. And I think I've seen that we've kind of lost some of that understanding of someone who maybe disagrees with us over the last few years, which is unfortunate, because we still do have a lot of folks that have different opinions and should be celebrated and discussed in a polite, I think, and open manner.
Yeah, indeed. And I think just being educated on the issue, which, as you said, Scott, is going to different sources and really digging in, and trying. And of course, we can't all dig into every issue out there. But if you're really concerned about land conservation, preservation issues, tribal engagement and sovereignty, then, make that a priority and try to understand those. And as you said, seek out those different sources. And that, I think, arms us as a democratic part of America to being subject to viewpoints that, are very slanted one way or the other.
Sure. And I'm reminded of maybe one of the definitions, and I wish I remembered who said it, but one of the definitions of compromise is that neither side is happy with the outcome, and that seems like it's been forgotten as well. It's got to either be win or lose. One side has to win and one side has to lose. We can't really compromise and make everyone upset on the way forward.
Well, exactly, and I think that notion of negotiation and compromise has allowed the American democracy to really thrive for these 230 some years. So, yeah, I'm very worried, but also hopeful that we're not going to abandon that core principle of our democracy, and that we can continue to have the civil engagement with the issues, and not sort of locking ourselves away in our ideological corners.
Right. Do you think too, Paul Reed, that organizations like yours, and I know that you work for Archaeology Southwest, and so you may not be privy to some of these things, but I would imagine there are some organizations like yours that are maybe hiring the lawyers and getting the attorneys standing by for what could be a legal fight over some of these issues that we're talking about this morning?
Well, it happened before, right? I mean, we joined a lawsuit with 5 other nonprofits when Bears Ears was reduced, illegally. From our standpoint, tribal groups sued separately, and so yeah, if the federal government undertakes action that is unconstitutional or illegal, or it's our opinion, our attorney's opinion, we're going to pursue that. So that is also an essential part of a democratic society, is the balance between powers with our executive, legislative, judicial sides, and really figuring out how to make good decisions for America that are not based on, the mindsets, the agenda of just a few individuals. So I think that's another challenge during these times.
Right. Very true. And in the meantime, though, a lot of your other initiatives that we've talked about here at Archaeology Southwest will continue, certainly, in other communities around the Southwest, and some of your work personally, I think, will continue, obviously, as well, correct? What's on your calendar for the spring of 2025?
Yeah, we're ramping up on a number of projects, and we'll talk about these in the future, Scott, but we're doing landscape type projects for Bandelier National Monument, for El Malpais National Monument, sort of wrapping up our project at Petroglyph National Monument. And these projects are about helping those parks and monuments manage their landscapes, and also have significant participation by the descendant communities, the Pueblos and tribes, who have very deep connections to these places. And, again, just trying to raise the level of really enlightened, we hope, management of the landscapes and the sites that matter to all of us.
Very good. Well, we'll look forward to those conversations as well. If I know anything about you, Paul Reed, I imagine that you are chomping at the bit to get back out into the field. And in winter season, it's tough to have to maybe stay in the office and not be able to get out there and get your hands dirty sometimes.
Indeed. And, if we have more winter, and we're hoping we do,
right.
We might be delayed. If not, we'll be able to get out a little earlier. So
very true.
We'll make it all work.
There you go. Well, Paul, we were just about out of time. It's an important issue that we talked about this morning, and I really encourage everyone to kind of investigate and pay attention to some of the things that are going on, especially if some of these places that are impacted are really special to them. It's important that they realize what could be happening. So appreciate you bringing that to our attention this morning. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you as always, Scott, and we'll do it again, sir.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much. That's Paul Reed from Archaeology Southwest, my guest here on KSJE. KSJE and the San Juan College Native American Center present the Student Study Tip of the Week.
Hello there, it's me, Emin Chi, Achievement Coach with the Native American Center, bringing you coaching tips of the week. For week 3, taking good notes. Study starts in the classroom. Pay attention and take good notes, so when you're studying later, you can just review information instead of looking for it for the first time. Speak with your professor about recording lectures on your phone. A recording can complement your notes so you can go back and re-listen to the information in case there are other details you pick up later to note them. Effective note-taking strategies can have a direct impact on your study habits, and it is one of the most important study tips for college.
The Student Study Tip of the Week is presented by the San Juan College Native American Center and KSJE. Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.